for Rabbi Moshe Soloveichik for helping us have this year, and I look forward to hearing shiurim from him. Okay, the topic will be mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, the mitzvah of counting the Omer. The mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is mentioned twice in the Torah. It says, "Usvatim lechem imachas haShabbos miyom haviachem es Omer tufa sheva Shabbos t'miena ad imachas haShabbos hashvias tishbur chamishim yom." There's a mitzvah of counting from the second day of Pesach until Shavuos, 50 days. It's actually 49 days. The 50th day is Shavuos. And there's a discussion whether biblically that mitzvah applies today or not, because what initiated the mitzvah was the giving of the carbon of the Omer sacrifice, which was a barley sacrifice. And today, obviously, the Beis Hamikdash is not rebuilt, so we do not have the sacrifice. So there's a discussion, and we'll get more into it later, as to whether the mitzvah of counting the Omer today is biblical or only rabbinic. Now, one of the questions asked by the Rishonim already is, why do we not make a bracha of Shehecheyanu on Sefiras Omer? After all, every mitzvah, the first time we do it, let it be Chanukah candles, let it be Lulav B'Nesreg, let it be Shofar, let it be Megillah, we make a bracha of Shehecheyanu. The question is, why don't we make a bracha of Shehecheyanu on the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer? Now, honestly, I feel there's a very simple answer, and the simple answer is because what is the bracha of Shehecheyanu? The bracha of Shehecheyanu, Shehecheyanu v'kiyimanu v'higiyanu. We arrived. In other words, the idea is that we reached the goal. And the essence of Sefiras Omer is that we did not yet reach the goal. In other words, the goal is Shavuos. So we couldn't make Shehecheyanu because Shehecheyanu implies the reaching of the goal. And the essence of the mitzvah of Sefira is that we did not yet reach the goal. Just as a side point, I think that this is one of the issues confronting secular Zionism. In other words, Zionism was establishing a Jewish state. And once the Jewish state was established, as each year passes by, there is less enthusiasm, there's less idealism, because in their minds, to a large degree, they already reached the goal. And the truth of the matter is, that was only the first step. It's like Sulam Mutzavartsa V'Rosh Magia Hashemayma. There's a ladder that's firmly on the ground, but its head reaches the heavens. And the first step is on the ground. But for some reason, the additional steps on the ladder were never part of their ideology of Zionism. But when we look into the Rishonim, they suggest another answer. And their answer is that when do we say a bracha of Shehecheyanu? Only on a mitzvah where one derives pleasure or happiness, hana. But the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, they say, and there is some dispute about that, but they say that the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is only rabbinic today. And why is it rabbinic? It's because it's Zeichel HaMikdash. It reminds us of the Beis Hamikdash, and the Beis Hamikdash today is in ruin. So when we fulfill the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, so instead of being overcome with joy and happiness, on the contrary, we were reminded of the state of ruin that the Beis Hamikdash is in. Consequently, we couldn't make the bracha of Shechianu. Now, there is a question against this, and the question is, because the halacha is that, let's say, by Lulav and Esrog, so on a biblical level, the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog on the first day is wherever you are. But on the other days of Sukkot, the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog on a biblical level is only in the Beis Hamikdash or in Yerushalayim. There's a discussion about it. And the halacha is that, let's say somebody can have a Lulav and Esrog on the first day or on the second day. But today, the mitzvah Lulav and Esrog is everywhere, all 7 days of Sukkot. Why? Because Zeichel HaMikdash, to commemorate the Beis HaMikdash. Now, if somebody did not take the Lulav and Esrog the first day, and he took it, let's say, on the third day, so he has to make Shechianu then, even though on the third day, there is no biblical mitzvah of taking the Lulav and Esrog, and the whole mitzvah Zeichel HaMikdash is to remind us of the temple. And why is it that when it comes to Lulav and Esrog, we don't say that the taking of the Lulav and Esrog is to reminds us of the Churban, of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And if one did not take the Lulav and Esrog the first day and the second day, he makes Shechianu on the third day. Now, there is a dispute between the Rambam and the other Rishonim as to whether, I make quick reference to it, the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog, the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer today is a biblical mitzvah or a rabbinic mitzvah. The Rambam's opinion is that the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is a biblical mitzvah, whereas the opinion of most other Rishonim, Tosfos and the Ran, most other commentaries say that the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is today only rabbinic. Why? Because the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is dependent upon the giving of the carbon of Omer, of giving the Omer sacrifice, which was given on the second day of Pesach. And when there is no Omer sacrifice, so there is no biblical mitzvah of Sefiras Omer. Now, and this has to do with the Gemara Menachos. The Gemara in Menachos says that Abaye and the Rabbanan Devei Ravashi, when they counted Sefira, because as we know, the mitzvah of Sefira is not just the mitzvah of counting the days, but it's a mitzvah of counting the weeks also. On the seventh day of Sefira, we'll say Hayom Shiva Yamim Shehem Shavu Echad Ba'Omer. Today is 7 days, which is 1 week in the count of the Omer. So it's a mitzvah of counting both the days and the weeks. So Abaye and the Rabbanan Devei Ravashi, when they counted the Sefira, they would say, let's say on the 7th day, today is 7 days, which is 1 week in the count of the Omer. However, Amemar, he used an abbreviated form of counting the Omer. And when he counted the Omer, he just said on the 7th day, Hayom Shiva Yomim Bomer. Today is 7 days. Amemar would not count the weeks. He only counted the days. And when he explained why he did it that way, he says it's Zeichel HaMikdash. Today, there is no biblical mitzvah of Sefiras Omer. The whole mitzvah is rabbinic to remember the Beis HaMikdash, and because of that, because of that, we do not have to use the full count. We don't have to count the weeks. It's Zeichel and Mikdash, we can count just the days. And the question is, now, so the Ran, when he explains the opinion of the Rambam, that the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, of counting the Omer today, is biblical, so he explains that the Rabbanan Debei Rav Ashi, they counted the whole Sefira. Why? And they counted days and weeks. Why? Because they felt that the mitzvah was biblical. So we have no right to use an abbreviated form of the count. However, a Maimar who just counted the days, as he says, it's Zeichel and Mikdash, it's only rabbinic. Since it's only rabbinic, I do not have to count the full count. I can count just the days, because by counting the days in itself, I remember the Beis HaMikdash. It's not necessary to count the weeks also. And the question is, it's very strange. What was a Maimar stingy with his words? Why is it that a Maimar did not use the full count? He would say on the seventh day, today is 7 days in the count of the Omer. He wouldn't say today is 7 days, which is 1 week in the count of the Omer. Why did he have to leave out the count of the weeks? It wasn't such a big burden. However, the Ran, and I should point out, the Ran's opinion is that everybody held that the mitzvah is rabbinic. But the argument between them is, should we count the full count, or do we use the abbreviated count? Now my uncle, whose yard site, by the way, was yesterday, my uncle suggested that the reason a Maimar counted only the days and not the weeks, because he felt that we have to show that the biblical mitzvah doesn't apply when the Beis HaMikdash is not there. In other words, the way my uncle put it, we have two types of zeichers, two types of remembrance of the Beis HaMikdash. We remember the Beis HaMikdash when it was built, and we remember the Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. When you think about relatives, soon we will be saying Yizkor. This time it'll be different than usual. Usually we say Yizkor in the synagogue, in the shul, but we'll be saying it in the house. And when we say Yizkor, on one hand, there is some sort of a good feeling. In other words, there are good memories. When we think about the departed relatives, there are good times. On the other hand, we sometimes focus and think about the tragedy. We remember them in their sickness. And my uncle said there are two types of Zeichel HaMikdash, two ways to remember the Beis HaMikdash. One way is to remember the Beis HaMikdash in its glory. It's the good feelings, the good times. But there's another mitzvah of Zeichel HaMikdash, of remembering the Beis HaMikdash, remembering the Beis HaMikdash in its destruction. Tisha B'Av, in its essence, is not remembering the Beis HaMikdash in its glory, but it's remembering the loss of the Beis HaMikdash. And my uncle said, Sefiras Omer, is a mitzvah of remembering the Beis Hamikdash in its destruction. It's Zeichel L'Churban. And he said because of that, Ameimar felt that we should not use the regular form. The regular form was used of counting when the Beis Hamikdash was in its existence. But when we count Sefira, we are trying to remember the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. We have to realize that the Beis Hamikdash is no longer there. And consequently, we when we count Sefira, when we count Sefira, so Ameimar's opinion was, we don't paskin like Ameimar, that we should only use part of the format of counting, not in order to show that there is a difference. And in truth, that's the answer to the question. Lulav, I think my uncle pointed that out also. Lulav, the mitzvah of Lulav is to remember the Beis Hamikdash in its existence, in its glory. The mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is not to remember the Beis Hamikdash in its glory, but to remember it in its destruction. But the question I want to address is, why is it that Sefiras Omer was used as the mitzvah to remember the Beis Hamikdash in its destruction, whereas the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog was to remember the Beis Hamikdash in its glory when it was built? Now, the Ran, whose opinion was that Sefiras Omer is only rabbinic, he tries to bring a certain indication from the Medrash for his opinion. And the Medrash says that the Jewish people, when they went out of Egypt, Moshe Rabbeinu said to them that we're soon going to come to Mount Sinai, and God is going to appear to us, and he is going to give us the Torah. And the Jewish people were excited about that. And they asked Moshe Rabbeinu, when will that happen? And Moshe Rabbeinu said that will take place in 50 days. So the Jewish people began counting the days till the giving of the Torah. And then the Medrash continues. And that's why the rabbis said that we should count Sefira in a sense to re-experience what happened to the Jewish people when they left Egypt, that they had this sense of something was incomplete in the Exodus from Egypt. So the rabbis instituted that we should count Sefira. And the Ran himself, he says, so we see that the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer was instituted by the rabbis. It's only rabbinic. So how could the Rambam suggest that the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer is a mitzvah d'oraisa, is a biblical mitzvah? So the Ran says, and the Ran answers, he says, and the Ran asks a question. He says, I don't understand. But the Medrash is very difficult in any case. The mitzvah of Sefiras Omer was instituted by the rabbis not in the desert when the Jewish people left not when the Jewish people left the Egypt, but it was instituted, as the Gemara tells us, Zeichel L'Churban, to commemorate the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So why does the Medrash say that the reason the rabbis instituted it is because the Jewish people counted the days until they came to Mount Sinai. And the Ran himself says, that's the derech of the Medrash. That is the Medrash style. Okay, I'm not sure what exactly is his answer, but I want to suggest that what the Medrash is trying to tell us, the Medrash was bothered by the same question that we're bothered. In other words, the question is, why was the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, of counting the Omer, used as the mitzvah to commemorate the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? Why that mitzvah of all the mitzvahs? And the answer is because what is the time? What was the reason for the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer? The biblical mitzvah of Sefiras Omer. The biblical mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, and the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim points this out also, in a sense, to re-experience the Jewish people traveling to Mount Sinai. In a sense, they had this feeling of something lacking. They were lacking the giving of the Torah. They were lacking the Sinai experience. And it was because they had that the Exodus was not complete. As a matter of fact, the fourth expression of Gula, of redemption, is V'lakachti eschem li la'am, and I will take you from me as a nation. And according to most of the commentaries on the Torah, that was fulfilled at Mount Sinai. So in other words, the Exodus process was not completed. So the people felt there was something missing, that closeness to God was not there, or that permanent closeness to God was not there. So, and it was to re-experience that feeling of something lacking that the Torah gave a mitzvah of Sefiras Omer. Now, the Ramban on the Torah, he suggests that each Chumash has a special theme. And he says, what is the theme of the Chumash Shmos? The theme of Chumash Shmos is the Exodus, the Yetzias Mitzrayim. So he says, well, that explains very well everything in the first half of Chumash Shmos through the giving of the Torah. Perhaps even about the Egel Hazav. But he says, but the focus on the Mishkan, of the building of the tabernacle at the end of Chumash Shmos, that seems to would be more appropriate. He doesn't say that explicitly, but it's implied. That would be more appropriate in Chumash, in Vayikra, in Torah's Kahanim, that talks about the sacrifices, that talks about the service in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, and in the Mikdash, in the temple. Why is it in Chumash Shmos? And the Ramban says that the purpose of the tabernacle was to serve as a vehicle to transfer the sanctity of Sinai to Jerusalem, to the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, was to be seen as the perpetuation of Sinai, the preparation of the giving of the Torah, and of the experience of sensing the presence of God that took place at Mount Sinai. And in a sense, when the Beis Hamikdash was taken away from us, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, it wasn't just, and it wasn't even primarily the building that was destroyed. but what was destroyed was our ability to sense the presence of God, to re-experience Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, in the same way as we were able at Sinai. And I think that this is what the Medrash means to say. The Medrash is trying to let us know, why is it that the Medrash is letting us know, why is it that Sefiras Omer was chosen by the rabbis as the biblical mitzvah, as the mitzvah that was biblical in the time of the existence of the Beis HaMikdash, to commemorate after the destruction of Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? And the answer is the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, even when it was biblical, even when the Beis HaMikdash was in existence, the purpose of the mitzvah was to remind us. The purpose of the mitzvah was to remind us. The purpose of the mitzvah was to remind us of the purpose of the mitzvah was to remind us of the purpose of the mitzvah was to remind us of that sense of lacking Mount Sinai. And with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, we again had that sense of lacking Mount Sinai, because the Mikdash, the temple, that is the perpetuation of Mount Sinai. However, the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog, the Torah says, why do we take the Lulav and Esrog 7 days? Usmachtem lefnei Hashem shivas yomim. You should be happy, demonstrate happiness, show happiness, feel happiness 7 days before God in the Beis HaMikdash. The mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog, which is a mitzvah of demonstrating happiness and feeling happiness, could not be used as the mitzvah that commemorates the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Only the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, which in itself, even when the temple was in existence, commemorated that feeling of lacking something, of not being able to sense the full presence of God, could be used to commemorate the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And that's why Amemar felt that we should not, in order to emphasize that that the Beis HaMikdash is no longer there, we shouldn't count the full sphere. Now, and because that's the nature of Sefiras Omer, it invokes a sense of sadness. And since it invokes a sense of sadness, we do not make the bracha of Shechianu. Now, I mentioned that yesterday was the yard site of my uncle. And as I mentioned, that yard site denotes, on one hand, we do 2 ways of remembering. We remember the presence of a person, and to a certain degree, when we remember the presence of a person, someone who we were close with, or someone who was a great personality for the Jewish people, so through the memory, it's, in a sense, the person continues to live. We bring him in our minds as if he was alive. But at other times, when a person passes away, we see the emptiness. We sense the lacking of something. And I think When we talk about my uncle, who probably was the greatest teacher of the Jewish people in the last 100 years, teacher of Torah, we have both these feelings. On one hand, he's no longer here. He's no longer able to give those special that he gave. But even more than that, he's no longer able to give the direction that he was able to give. Now, my uncle was different than most of the Gedolei Yisrael and most Rosh Yeshivas. My uncle very rarely imposed his opinion, even on his own students. He would explain to them, but he didn't try to impose. He saw himself as a teacher. He would say he's a Melamed. And I think that when it comes to contemporary issues that are taking place today, I do not want to go into what those contemporary issues are right now, because each one undoubtedly would be controversial, and I would have to spend a lot of time to explain my feelings about it. But unfortunately, what is happening, that many people are attributing their opinion to my uncle's philosophy and approach. And this is both with those who identify with him on the right, as well as those who identify with him on the left, as well as those who see themselves as centrists. Whatever position they have, they try to attribute their position to my uncle's philosophy. And the truth of the matter is, my uncle was not really part of any movement on one end of the spectrum or on the other end of the spectrum. He wasn't like these simple people that want to be identified with one group or identified with the other group. Each issue had to be evaluated on its own merits. When he came out against the ecumenical conferences, it wasn't because he wanted to identify with the right wing as opposed to the left wing, but it was because he felt that the association with the Catholic Church in certain manners was dangerous for the Jewish people. When he came out on regarding in favor of the state of Israel, it wasn't because he wanted to identify with the left-wingers, but it was because he felt that the state of Israel was necessary, especially after the Holocaust, necessary for the continuation of the Jewish people as a nation. And today, we find people, some who were Talmidim of his, that try to remake history, to reinterpret history. And the problem is, he is not here to say what he really believed. And the Talmidim of these Talmidim do not really know. And that's where things are completely misrepresented. And we have new issues today that didn't exist at that time. And people are still, they suggest things. They suggest approaches in my uncle's name, which my uncle never commented on, because those issues didn't arise. And we're lacking that direction. In a sense, the Zikaron, we're missing him. We feel the lack. But on the other hand, when it comes to his Kedushay Torah, when it comes to the way he taught Torah, when it comes to his shiurim, there is probably no one else's shiurim has learned as much as the shiurim of my uncle Zatzal. No one in the last 100 years. And what is interesting is, usually with the Rosh Yeshivas, I remember when I was a young boy, and we would use the Svarim of the Rosh Yeshivas of Europe, of the last generation. That was the central focus of many of the shiurim that Rosh Yeshivas gave. But as time passed, these Svarim are not used as much anymore. And with my uncle, as time passes, more and more is this Torah being used. Some of the times, it's even said over in his name. And it's well known in circles, you know. If you want to sell a Haggadah today, you just have to write on it, it's a Brisker Haggadah. I mean, there are more Brisker Haggadahs, I think, than, I don't know. Just every year, a new Brisker Haggadah comes out. And they have to find new Torah. That Reb Chaim said. There's no doubt. There's no limit to the Torah that Reb Chaim said. But these people don't know it. So what do they do? So one Haggadah, they got the notes of my uncle's shiurim. The notes were not necessarily perfect. And they published it in a manner to give the impression, that the Torah was Reb Chaim's Torah. And many people felt that they were disgracing my uncle. They weren't giving him credit for what he said, for what he taught. And that's true. They certainly were not interested in giving my uncle kavod and respect. But one thing we see, that whose Torah could be identified as being Reb Chaim's Torah. My uncle's Torah could be identified as being Reb Chaim's Torah. And recently I heard that a certain philosopher said that, almost in a tone that expressed disappointment and almost anger with my uncle, that he's disappointed with my uncle, because even though my uncle, so to say, introduced the study of Jewish philosophy in a new manner, and something that this philosopher approved of, nevertheless, he felt that his criticism of my uncle is that when it came to halacha, my uncle he didn't paskin differently, especially when it came to laws concerning marriage and divorce. He didn't paskin differently than his grandfather Reb Chaim would have paskin. In other words, he did not liberalize the Torah. He says, whereas other poskim, of course he was wrong about that, had a liberal attitude. But in his criticism of my uncle, he gave my uncle the greatest compliment. That my uncle, when it came to Torah, to teaching Torah, learning Torah, and when it came to halacha, he did not deviate from the path. He did not deviate from the path of Reb Chaim, of his grandfather. And we could say about my uncle's Torah that through his Torah continues to live, and he continues to live. And it's O Joseph Chai, but not only O Joseph Chai, but through his Torah, Klal Yisrael has a stronger connection with the Torah of my grandfather, Rabbi Moshe, and with the Torah of Reb Chaim, and with the Torah of all our predecessors, of our ancestors, of all of our ancestors. And it's a continuation of the Masorah from Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay. All right. Any questions?
Thank you very much. One question.
Yeah.
So now anyone who has a question, please type it in the chat and I'll ask it. Baruch Hashem, we have a lot of people here, so it's going to be a little too hefker if we try to ask the questions. One person asked if you wanted to discuss the seeming contradiction between the Torah calling the Omer 50 days and in one place 7 weeks, which would only be 49 days.
All right. Many discussed it already. Many discussed it. Some say it means on the 50th day. I even saw some say on the 50th day you bring the carbon. You count 49 days, and the 50th day you bring the carbon. And I even saw, I don't remember if it was the Sefer Agudah or Rokeach, one of the Rishonim said that the 50th day, that's when we make Kiddush and we say Chag HaShavuos Hazeh. And some use that to explain the custom that Shavuos, we don't start davening Ma'ariv till after Tzeis HaKochavim, because you need 49 days to pass, and with the 50th day, you fulfill Chamishim Yom with the saying of Kiddush, or in Shemon Esrei saying Chag HaShavuos Hazeh. A matter of fact, we could suggest there is a machlokes between the Rabbiyah and the other Rishonim as to the Sefiras Omer. What is the text of the Sefiras Omer? The Rabbiyah, we say, we make a bracha, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvosav b'tzivanu al Sefiras Omer, who commanded us on the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer, and then we count. According to that, it's just a bracha on the mitzvah. The same way I make a bracha on lulav, on esrog, on halal, and all that. I just make a bracha on the mitzvah counting. However, the Rabbiyah's opinion, my uncle mentions the Rabbiyah many times in the notes anyway. The Rabbiyah's opinion is, you say Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvosav b'tzivanu al Sefiras Omer. Shehayom, that today is Yom Echad, let's say on the first day. That today is one day in the Omer. In other words, the Omer is part of the bracha. The Omer itself is part of the bracha. The bracha is not just on the Sefira, but the Omer itself is part of the bracha. It could be that the reason the Rabbiyah had that opinion is because the Rabbiyah felt that the Sefiras Omer is connected to the mitzvah of Kiddush, as some Rishonim suggest, Kiddush on Shavuos. And just as Kiddush on Shavuos is recited through a bracha, so it could be that the mitzvah of Sefiras Omer has to be recited through a bracha, not just a bracha on the sphere. Okay.
You actually, I've heard you discuss that sheet other times. Not the Rokach. You said it was the Sefer Aguda.
I mentioned both now. I said I don't remember which one it
Right.
was.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a question here I don't fully understand, but perhaps a Maimar, going back to something from the beginning, a Maimar didn't want to trigger a formula that he couldn't fulfill in the Chorban, in the time of the Chorban. Well, that's
on the contrary. A Maimar didn't want to. That's exactly. I'm not 100% sure what the question is, but assuming the question, that's exactly was his opinion. In other words, he wanted to show that that Sefiras Omer today is only Zeichel Churban. So he wanted done in a different manner than it was done in the Beis Hamikdash.
right. It
In
couldn't
the
be
time of the Beis Hamikdash.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't see. Yeah, I don't see any other questions here. But I want to thank everyone for joining in here, and to Rabbi Soloveichik for giving the share. Thank you very much. I'm looking for any last comments on the chat. I don't see anything.
I'll just if is there a minute yet?
You can keep
I just
going.
yeah, okay, just 1 minute. Just add something. A thought comes to my mind. This year more than any other time, I mentioned it. We're going for the first time when it comes to Yisker. Yisker in the old days, everybody would run to shul. People who never would be in shul would run to shul. This year, we're going to be saying Yisker in the house. And I mentioned that when we remember, sometimes it has the impact, not just to remembering the loss, but in the sense giving life to the person, keeping the person alive. And when we go to shul, we keep him alive as a member of the Jewish people. But today, that we're going to be saying Yisker in our homes, we have this opportunity to see our ancestors and those who departed as not just alive as members of the Jewish people, but as alive as members of our family and as our home. And perhaps one of the impacts of this virus, the way we act, is that we learn the importance of the home and the importance of the family. Usually we're running away from the house and we're running away from the home and sometimes running away from the family. But the virus has caused us to come back to the home, hopefully in a permanent way, to some way to get to be more focused on the family and on the home than just on the street and outside the home. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. A couple questions here were additional questions. When's the next share? Could we do like this, the weekly share? So to answer those questions is we don't know when the next share is going to be yet. Rav Moshe gives a weekly parsha share on Sunday morning here in Skokie, and we are very seriously considering having when it resumes, but doing it on Zoom also, so people would be able to participate in that wherever they are.
Times and days will be worked out, and we'll inform them when it happens. Okay,
Right.
So that's what it is. Okay. Any other questions?
Someone wants to know if we could.
Yeah, okay.
Someone wants to know if we could post the share for people who missed part of it. A recording.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
Okay, so so for those who asked about that, I'll get to it on YouTube. I can't promise it's going to happen today, and then I'll send out a link to it to the same people who hopefully forwarded you about the share, so you'll be able to get the link from that way. Or contact me. I'm not going to put my contact here, but you'll be able to find me if you look. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.
Good Moed.
All right.
And thank you for joining. I'm going
Okay.
to end the meeting now.